And now, from the capital city, it's Nightique with Edward St. Pay.
Thank you, Jim Pollard, and welcome to the show. I'm Edward St. Pay. I'm your host, and I'm happy to be with you tonight. You know, we're always on the lookout here at Nightique for good news about the state of Mississippi, and looks like we've got a great story to lead our newscast off with tonight. Arkansas has been ranked with the highest adult obesity rate in the nation at 36%, to which Mississippi obesians everywhere are pledging, wait until next year. In related national news, the Pentagon warned that 1 out of every 4 applicants for Army enlistment is unfit to serve in the military due to obesity. It's an emergency. And as a nation, America either needs to get in shape or recruit a separate fat army that will only invade countries that don't have any hills. To celebrate its 50th year as one of Las Vegas's most popular hotel casinos, Caesars Palace will undergo a $75 million upgrade. It will thus become the most renovated structure on the Strip, not counting Cher. And Los Angeles is seeking an NFL team. It's amazing there's no NFL team in Los Angeles. Fans will look at a field and see a lush artificial texture. But enough about the cheerleaders. Sotheby's auction house in London announced it will sell an original copy of the 1631 Bible edition printed in English, which contains a misprint. In the 7th commandment it reads, "Thou shalt commit adultery." It's the same edition of the Bible they use to swear in members of Congress. A survey shows Bud Light as the preferred beer among underage drinkers. Minors tend to acquire alcohol from one primary source, Bill Cosby. The Secret Service adopted a new policy which allows them to track the cell phones of suspects without obtaining a warrant. It's about time. This will aid Secret Service agents when they're overseas and they're trying to track down hookers who sold them baby powder and stole their wallets. And Macy's has announced it will open its doors at 6 o'clock on the evening of Thanksgiving this year. Macy's employees are torn. On the one hand, they won't be spending Thanksgiving with their relatives and in-laws. On the other hand, they won't be spending time with their relatives and in-laws. Well, we've got Mr. Ed Bishop, which was the first African-American on television in the state of Mississippi. He's with us tonight, and the long-tenured WLBT news director, Dennis Smith, is also with us, and we'll talk to both of them coming up on this edition of Nightique. Stay tuned.
We'll be right back with more of Nightique after these messages.
This is our Gray's Box. It's a great way to snack. Fresh, tasty, and created using only the best ingredients. Choose from our range of over 90 delicious snacks. We'd like to invite you to try a hand-picked box for free. Go to grays.com and we'll send a free box directly to your office or home. It may even help you keep your hand out of the cookie jar.
Go to grays.com and enter the code GRAYS34 for a free box.
Grays.com. Snacking reinvented.
Bengal presents From One Legend to Another.
Good day. I must say I've deduced that Bengal roach spray is a superior product. It's kept all traces of those vile creatures from my home. Which lets me focus on more meaningful pursuits.
People trust Bengal Roach Spray's legendary performance. No odor, no mess, no roaches. Bengal Roach Spray really works.
With Bengal, I love having a little more me time.
Ingalls Shipbuilding has pioneered the development and production of technologically advanced, highly capable warships for the U.S. Navy, Coast Guard, and Marine Corps for more than 75 years. Ingalls is Mississippi's largest manufacturing employer, and today Ingalls has an immediate need for more than 200 electricians at our Pascagoula, Mississippi site. Apply today at www.buildyourcareer.com or call 888-935-1507.
And now back to more Nightique.
Well, we'd like to introduce you to Mr. Edward S. Bishop, Jr., who
That's correct.
was the first African-American on television in Mississippi.
That's correct, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bishop, for being here.
My genuine pleasure.
You know, you are one of the pioneers of broadcasting. From the standpoint of 1967, in that time frame, coming on television as the first African American on television in Jackson and statewide, what was that environment like when you went on?
Surprisingly enough, the environment was reasonable. As we were preparing for it at the television station, Bert Case was the news director, and Bert saw no problems. And Mr. C. Paul and Mr. Owen Alexander were forward-looking people. And when they asked me to be on, they had no problems, except that I did not want to bring news from just the black community. And that was the only opposition that we had, because if I was going to be a newsman, I wasn't going to allow myself just to get news from the black community. I said, if I'm going to anchor, I must anchor everybody's news, as all newsmen do. There was no opposition to that. Everybody agreed.
Out there in TV land,
yes,
when a black American is now anchoring a newscast, at that time, did you encounter anything, let's say, anything negative out there, feedback-wise, from people who are not used to seeing this?
Surprisingly enough, the night of the first broadcast, somebody called and told Bert Case, said, look, if he's going to be on there, I'm not going to look at Channel 12 anymore. Bert Case told him, you got to dial. And that was the end of that, and that was the only incident of that type. I'll have to acknowledge that I was received exceptionally well during those days. When I was on, naturally, I'm sure the ratings went up just because something different was going on. And that's the way it was.
Well, how was coverage during that time when you had a segment of the audience that up to that point maybe was not covered as thoroughly as the coverage that you provided when you got into the slot, the anchor slot?
Well, certainly, because Channel 12 had to get a mass of black viewers. And I was a teacher in Jackson before that time. I was a graduate supply salesman. I saw a lot of students. And it was somewhat of a, shall we say, it was positive. The atmosphere was positive. We did not find any mean spirits or spirited persons on the air, looking at us on the air at that time.
Now, you mentioned Bert Case was the news director at Channel 12.
Right.
And of course, I know Bert Case from my startup in weather at Channel 3 later.
Right.
When we talk about Bert Case, we are talking about a guy who's cross-generational link between your tenure and my experience.
Yeah.
He goes a long way back, and he's one of the legends too, just like yourself, of broadcasting in Mississippi.
Well, Bert was, I've never seen a person so specific in his attitude about my going on the air. If I had a difference with the management, Bert would look at me and say, you going to take that? I said, okay, Bert, I'll take care of it. And that's as much, and those, Channel 12 at that time, it wasn't an anti-black station. In fact, they had asked me. There was a orchestra on there, Duke Huddleston in those days, and Duke was coming on every Saturday, and Duke asked me to MC the program. Duke Huddleston was very fine at the rotisserie in those days, and a group of musicians from Jackson, and of course they played on Channel 12, and that was the first time I was on Channel 12 doing anything, sort of emceeing that show. And it was well received. Now, one incident that did occur, when I was there, they asked me to bring on gospel music from the black community. And I told them that I would bring on music, not just gospel music. They said, well, black people like gospel music. I say, white folks too. And as a result of that, I was allowed to have a Sunday morning show when they agreed to that. And surprisingly enough, the show was well received by the whole community of Jackson. because at that time, I was a student, a former student of Jackson State, and Jackson State had so much from the standpoint of music to show the communities. And I remember the music director, not the music director, but the woman that was over graduating students in music. And she would not allow her graduate students to bring sheet music. And as a result of that, Jackson State's students were the only one that came on as students in their recitals without music. And I did have the opportunity to have one of my classmates at Jackson State in that day. He had gotten a job at the University of Arkansas, the big University of Arkansas, and he brought a chambers ensemble through, and he asked me if I could get a show for Channel 12. And that too was different in those days. The University of Arkansas, and my classmate was a clarinetist. And one thing I remember about that, the director of that show, the head man, I went up and tried to pronounce a word that they were going to play the name of it, and I got it kind of wrong before we went on the air. I said, "Sir, what is this?" He said, "That's Listwater Soldair." Well, I'd never heard of Listwater Soldair, because apparently French. And I made sure, as I introduced them on that particular rendition, I made sure I had Listwater Soldair, because I wrote it up on the Listwater Soldair to make sure that it was right. And those were things that were going on during that time. In fact, there's a college up in North Mississippi, Rust College. They have one of the finest musical programs anywhere. And they came down, and in terms of responses, I think we got more letters from the white community when those people came than any program that we'd ever had. Mrs. Doxley is no longer living, but she brought that choir along, and that was a especially great choir. She had I think she bought a quartet and everything. And I got boxes and boxes of mail as a result of her program. But Jackson State was great in what they were doing along those lines. So on that show, I had an opportunity to do all of that. And I remember Jackson State did an opera. I was in that first opera, but this particular opera was called The Mall and the Night Visitors. And there, in that particular presentation, the auditorium was full. And nobody knew that that kind of thing was going on that campus in those days. The one that I was in was Cavalleria Rusticana by Moschini. And we also did the Oratorio Elijah. Quite a bit was going on over there at that time that people don't even know that it was done. I don't know whether they're doing quite as much, but we did the Magnificat, and that was the kind of renditions that Jackson State was doing in those days. And as a result of being the news anchor, anytime that I would find something out about that, I would go to Jackson State and get it on the air. That's the one good thing that I enjoyed about the position that I had. And Jackson State, anytime that I asked, they came. They came with their choir. I remember percussion ensemble once. They were outstanding. And that's the one thing that I miss now. And I don't see that now. I'm not criticizing integration, but you don't see that now. And those kind of cultural incidents, circumstances were common there at that time. I mean, we on that one opera that I was a part of at that time, we had 5 encores. 5 encores. Now these are operas I'm talking about, but most of the time in those days, anything that black folks did, they were looking for gospel. In fact, if you recall the Jackson Southern Airs, I was the first one to put them on in Mississippi or anywhere. And everybody knows them. But those were the kind of experiences that I did get an opportunity to have at Jackson, as I was first man on anchoring the news in Mississippi. I think at the time that was probably all over the South and a lot of places in the North.
Now, you worked with Dennis Smith, our next guest, at Channel 12. You were both anchoring together, right?
That's right. Dennis Smith had been on there a little sooner than I. I think I was a little tight that night. And I think Bert decided we would co-anchor that night together, and just to smooth things out. Dennis had been on there a bit, so that gave me an opportunity to sort of relax. And there was no pressure, but it did make it at that time a little bit better.
So, I know this is another show we're going to get into here, but I just want to mention, you were at Channel 12 as an anchor. Now, meanwhile, over at Channel 3 WLBT, a lot of changes were brewing. Can you just speak a little bit about all that?
Well, of course, I don't. They were having problems. There was Dr. Aaron Henry, who was buying the station, and of course, Channel 3 were not doing what they were doing or we were doing at Channel 12. And as a result
Not doing in what regard?
Why was it different?
Yeah.
Well, there we were doing and reaching the whole community.
Right.
Whereas,
with an African-American anchor, for example.
That's right. Let me mention something, too. Bill Goodrich, you remember him? He was a sports director there. I was a teacher at this time that I'm talking about at Jim Hill High School here in Jackson. Well, Jim Hill High School had won a national football championship. And I asked the principal, I said, sir, nobody puts our sports on the air. Would you allow me to go downtown to Channel 3 to see if I get Bill Goodrich to run the highlights of that victory that Jim Hill High School did? He says, he hit his hand and said, Professor, he said, Professor, he called me Professor. They're not gonna let you do that. I said, would you allow me to go down there, please? And so he said, okay, go ahead. When I saw Bill Goodrich, he said, well, if you can script it and get it back to me by 6, we'll do it. And true enough, the principal said, they're not gonna show that. I said, call and tell, it was so important during those days. I said, Mr. Marshall, call the other schools and let them know that we're gonna be on 6 o'clock sports. They're not gonna do it. I said, go ahead, please, sir, and do it. Sure enough, Channel 3 did show it. And it was an important thing and something real different in those days.
Now, like I said, it's probably a whole other show we need to do to talk a little bit about the WLBT thing. But in essence, what happened was that the FCC, because of issues that WLBT had in this regard, the license was eventually pulled, and it was awarded to an interim group, and it happened to be headed by Dr. Aaron Henry. And first black general manager in America was Mr. Dilday, William Dilday, who came out.
I remember Mr. Dilday, yes.
It was sort of a pivotal moment, I guess, in broadcasting, not only for the South, but nationwide, as we had the first black-owned television station in America right here in Jackson, Mississippi, WLBT.
One thing I remember about that, Mr. Dilday gave my daughter a job. And I remember.
Well, he was the general manager when I went on the air.
Is that right?
So now, will you come back? We've got Dennis Smith waiting in the wings, but I want to talk to you more specifically about this particular thing on another show. Will you come back and talk to us again soon?
It would be my genuine pleasure, sir.
Mr. Edward S. Bishop, thank you for being with us, and we'll have you back soon.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Dennis Smith coming up next.
We'll be right back with more of Nightique after these messages.
This is our Gray's Box. It's a great way to snack. Fresh, tasty, and created using only the best ingredients. Choose from our range of over 90 delicious snacks. We'd like to invite you to try a hand-picked box for free. Go to grays.com and we'll send a free box directly to your office or home. It may even help you keep your hand out of the cookie jar.
Go to grays.com and enter the code GRAYS34 for a free box.
Grays.com. Snacking reinvented.
When you are looking to further your education, there's only one university that towers above the rest, Jackson State University. Jackson State University is one of the leading universities in research, technology, and innovation, graduating more than 1,300 students annually and a consistent growth in revenue.
And now back to more Nightique.
Well, Dennis Smith, the news director at Channel 3 in Jackson, recently retired a couple of years now. Welcome to the show.
Absolutely, good to be here.
And
good
so
to see
when I started, you were winning Peabody Awards as the head of the investigative unit probe at WLBT in Jackson. Right. And before that, you worked with Edward Bishop, our guest who just left, and you were a co-anchor with him.
Edward and I anchored the weekend news and sports at WJTV for several years.
So now, I don't know where to begin. The changes that you've seen in 40 years of television.
45.
45. Tell us, what are the significant changes that you can recall?
Well, one of the biggest changes, of course, back in those days, we had film, and you had to edit your own film, and it was really tricky editing. You had the guillotine splicer, you had the hot splicer first, and the guillotine splicer, and you really prayed that that stuff really held when you put that stuff on that reel when you went and gave the director the control room so that it didn't break. So it was fast-paced back then, but lots has happened technology-wise over the years between live shots and now it's everything's in discs and things like that.
So when you say film, this predates tape completely. You're talking about film, 16 millimeter or 16
millimeter film. Yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And you had to be careful, as I say, but it was fun to do, and you could be creative. And that's the great thing about television is you can be creative in a lot of stories, whether it's hard-hitting news stories or whether it's features and things like that. I know Probe, I enjoyed editing. When I was director of that, we ran, it was a 30-minute, half-hour documentary. We ran every Wednesday night at 6:30 for a number of years, and really, really enjoyed that. I mean, I'd gone to law school at night for 5 years, and when I graduated and got admitted to the bar, I was already doing Probe, and I said, anybody can practice law. How many people get a chance to do a half-hour weekly investigative documentary and be in charge of it? And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really looked back and said that was really a defining moment, how much I really enjoyed being in this business.
And winning a Peabody to boot, that was an amazing accomplishment.
Well, it was an interesting story. We did a number of stories. That particular report focused on probably the most powerful man in state government, Senator Bill Bergen. He was chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and by virtue of his being in the chairman of Senate Appropriations, he controlled virtually the entire purse strings of Mississippi. And these state government officials had to come up before him, and he would lambast them pretty well, so we did a pretty good job. But at the same time, he had a number of conflicts of interest, too, that we explored and went and found out a number of things that he threatened to sue me if I ever did the story and all this, that, and the other. But the bottom line is there were a number of conflicts of interest on his part. The FBI began looking at him sometime later on some deals involving him and another guy dealing with Head Start program, and they got a huge piece of the pie, way too much. It was basically what amounted to a kickback. So he subsequently was indicted and served some time, and that was his end.
So as a news director, I mean, you must always live on the edge of what to cover or how to cover it and what not to cover, when to pull back. All of those things, right?
You have to balance that. Well, with the stuff that you got to cover, just daily stuff, whether it's a city council meeting of supervisors, and try to get someone, a reporter, who could cover that and make it interesting, because it can be exceedingly boring if you know what you're doing. But at the same time, you're looking at the stuff that is breaking news, whether it's particularly weather, as you well know. There's nothing more important to the viewers at home outside of breaking weather. It is the thing, and people had need. I think people now understand that when you're on almost wall-to-wall coverage of tornadoes around the area, it may not be in your community, but it may be 50 miles down the road, and you're legally responsible to the FCC to require you to spend every effort to notify people, make sure that they're safe and know what to expect.
You mentioned in Probe, you won a Peabody. You were doing a story about a politician that had some issues, that were conflicts of issues. Now, let's fast forward to the election right now. People out there are looking at candidates that are really they don't have any prior government experience. They're outside of the box candidates. What do you make of all this?
Well, a lot of people, including friends of mine, have their favorite candidate right now. We're a year away from the election. A lot of things can happen. We have more debates. They're trying to organize another debate and try to set the parameters, the ground rules on this, because there's been some questions about how well the other debates have proceeded and the questioners and this, that, and the other. So, particularly the Republicans are trying to figure out, okay, what's the best course of action? You got a lot of candidates still in there. Some of them are going to start falling by the wayside at some point. They just, can't have the money and the sustainability. But it is a huge, huge thing for our country to get involved. Whatever party, whatever candidate you decide, you got to read as much as you can. Read whatever you can find on that party, that individual. Keep track of things. And again, we're a year away, a little over a year, and so it's important to look and try to keep an open mind as best you can. Look at all the angles. See what candidate you think may be best for the country.
Do you feel like there's a backlash right now, that the public is sick and tired of the way things have been, and that's why they're gravitating to some of these candidates that are stepping forward, like Corson and Trump and such? No question about it. They're looking for a new identity, a new path. There's a lot of unhappiness out there. We've yet to see exactly how the economy is going to tank out over the next year. That's going to be a significant factor. World events, huge, huge issues. The budget, again, you're looking at a $20 trillion budget here. That's at some point, where do you say enough's enough? But we must look at who the best people we think would represent not just our community, not just our state, but our country, and all the issues that we are faced with, because we are still the country in the whole world that people look at as a real leader. Dennis, we are going to ask you to come back and continue this conversation for another show, and we want to congratulate you on your retirement, and we're proud to have you with us today. I appreciate it. After 45 years of being at the helm of a news department, there's a whole lot of insight we can gain from talking to you, so thank you. I enjoyed it very much. Good to see you again. You too. Thank you.
Join us every weeknight statewide for Nightique with Edward St. Pé. If you have suggestions for guests or want to be on the show yourself, drop us a line at www.nightique.com. I'm your announcer, Jim Pollard. Good night from all of us at Nightique.